Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How AI and a Craft Labor Recruiting Platform Can Transform Skilled Trade Recruitment. We're excited you could join us. My name is Chris Warren, and I'll be moderating today's event. Let's start with some context. At a high level, the data about worker shortages in the construction industry appear to speak for themselves. According to analysis by Associated Builders and Contractors, or ABC, released in early 2025, the construction industry needs to attract about 440,000 net new workers this year to meet anticipated demand. And even if the industry pulls off that hiring spree, the task gets even more challenging next year. That's because ABC's analysis projects that hiring will have to accelerate to nearly 500,000 to meet demand in 2026. Not surprisingly, you don't have to look hard to find gloomy labor projections across a wide array of skilled trades. For example, the American Welding Society estimates that about 80,000 positions need to be filled annually between 2025 and 2029 to keep up with demand. Worries about worker shortages come at an especially inopportune time. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave the U.S. a grade of C in its most recent infrastructure report card, citing trillions of dollars in necessary investments to modernize the country's roads, bridges, ports, telecom networks, energy system, and other foundational pillars of infrastructure. While there's no denying that America needs many more craft workers than it currently has, the supply and demand narrative is not as black and white as the data would indicate. That's because the process to connect skilled workers and the general contractors eager to hire them is so inefficient and manual that workers, employers, and construction projects all suffer. Indeed, labor shortages are exacerbated because time and resources are wasted trying to connect workers to jobs. Now, we're lucky today because our guest, Fraser Patterson, who's the founder and CEO of Skillit, knows this personally. As a general contractor in New York, he experienced firsthand the pain of the inefficient approach to connecting skilled workers to the jobs where they are desperately needed. Multiply the inefficiency that Fraser experienced personally millions of times, and it's easy to see why skilled trades need better tools to connect workers to general contractors. Now, Fraser launched Skillit to do something about those inefficiencies of connecting skilled workers to contractors and EPCs that currently spend so much time trying to find each other. And we're going to learn all about how a craft labor recruiting platform and AI can make the entire process faster, more effective, and lower cost. But before we get started with and dive into all those good topics, I have just a few housekeeping items. Please note the slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. To enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slides button located in the top right corner of your presentation window. If you need technical assistance, click on the Help widget located on the bottom left corner of your console. We encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget at the bottom of your console. We'll try to answer these during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, they'll be answered later via email. Please know that we do capture all questions. All right, now I already gave a little bit of a preview for who Fraser is, but I'm going to let him introduce himself. Go ahead, tell the audience a bit about your background and you know, I mentioned your work as a general contractor. That's probably relevant to our conversation as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Chris. Excited to share Skillit with the audience. Yeah, so I was a former journeyman, essentially an apprentice carpenter, journeyman carpenter. I ended up, you know, being a general contractor for many years, both in the UK and here in the US, and actually built a renovation platform to de-risk renovation, brought the kernel of that to New York, built a kind of vertically integrated GC here in New York, and that's when I came face to face with our nation's labor crisis, and decided that was what I wanted to spend quite possibly the rest of my life trying to understand and fix. So, and of course, that became that was the reason behind building Skillit and founding Skillit 3 years ago.
Great. Well, we're going to dig all into Skillit and some of the, how it works and how people can use it to really start to address some of the labor issues they may be facing. But we're gonna take a step back before we do that. Now, in my introduction, I probably referenced a bunch of statistics people are already familiar with. There's plenty. You don't have to look hard to find data about labor gaps. And, I also mentioned that the data seems to speak for itself, but not necessarily. And Fraser, I think you're in a great position to educate people about what's true about this skilled labor shortage and what's a little bit more nuanced when you really look at the data. And I know you look at the data.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, so you're looking at 440,000 workers that the industry at large is short out of about the 8.74 million that it needs in 2025, right, to meet the demand, construction demands. I think what's really interesting there is that is a 5% gap. So that means that if you zoom out and you consider your average project across all trades and all types of flavors of labor and industry verticals, you're actually looking at a 1 in 20 shortage. So if you're putting together a project, it means for every 20 workers you need, one of them's missing. Now that doesn't sound like much, and then you take into consideration that it's really the most commonly cited business problem of GCs, whether it's your top E&R, your mid-market SMBs. 94%, I think, according to the most recent AGC study or ABC. So it's got there's a shortage, and it's obviously acutely felt. What's really interesting is other industries like retail, software, nursing, they all have much larger gaps. And I think that's a really interesting insight that other industries have much larger gaps. I mean, take nursing, for example, 10% of the necessary workers needed to meet the demand of our hospitals and so on and so forth is missing from the market. And yet none of these industries report the same level of disruption or urgency. So for some reason, construction feels it way more acutely than any other industry. And we think this is because it's simply not just a labor shortage. I mean, there's clearly a labor shortage. You have, more workers retiring. It's physical work, so there's not much margin there. There's fewer coming into the trades. We've, I'd say the Western world's done a number on our the just culturally kind of pushing all of our youth into 4-year degrees, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But so there's fewer workers remaining, fewer workers coming in. But we think that fundamentally the real kind of hair on fire problem is that we can't access the workers that we already have, and that's a real. I think there's two really interesting takeaways here. One is why is that the case, and also what does it mean? I'd say, first of all these other industries have adapted to their labor shortages. So let's take retail. It's a mostly physically static environment. The deployment of robotics has been fairly successful there, and it continues to advance pretty quickly. If you're running if you're looking to hire software engineers, you can outsource globally. Healthcare, something like 30% of nurse jobs are admin. So you can automate that work. Construction can't do any of that. Craft work's highly dynamic. So robotics are pretty much a little bit of a pipe dream at the moment, at least a kind of distant solution. It's very hyper local work, so it cannot be offshored at all. And it's entirely manual. So there's nothing to automate in terms of, LLMs are not going to support that at all.
Right.
And so the actual blocker is there's never been any data on the individual workers. And without it, you can't have a kind of hiring infrastructure with intelligent tools. So that's why we're stuck using all these patchwork of tools like job boards and referrals, ATS software, staffing agencies, dare I say, unions obviously serve their function, but again, the workers aren't digitized properly. And so they all fall short in the same way. Workers aren't digitized. Turns out only 18% of them are even using job boards. So that means search doesn't work. So if you try to actually find workers on construction specific filters like certifications, per diem, trade history, they don't show up. And most recruiters, if you're not from the craft yourself, it takes a while to learn what to look for. So, and the tools don't fit. It's mostly a call-centric workflow, both sides. Workers are in the field, recruiters are using phones, and yet all the tools they're using are built around desktop and email. So
Right.
an amazing stat is that 75% of workers that are interested and qualified never even get a call back. So that's a different insight, I think, into the problem.
Let me pick up on a couple things you brought up. One, I want you to talk about, you said the word digitized, and I think that's really essential to where we're headed in this conversation. So I'm going to have you talk about that. But before you do, there is also an observation that, when it comes to skilled craft workers, there's a big disconnect in sort of connecting workers with the skills needed on a project to those specific projects. And the possibility also that, there might just be an abundance of certain types of workers, skilled, whether it's people who can remodel bathrooms or whatever, and maybe the need is more in certain skills. So maybe if you could talk about sort of that connection issue, challenge,
Mm-hmm.
and then let's talk about the whole digitization piece, because that's going to get us into what a platform and AI can do.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I mean, obviously, the industry itself is very fragmented, right, by trade and by region. So certain regions in the US have more of one trade, less of another, and so therefore the 1 in 20 shortage that I'm referring to when you zoom out can become a very different number as you zoom into particular trade regions, right? So the labor shortage and the access problem is to varying degrees of intensity depending on where in the country you are and what trades you're trying to search for, and obviously what verticals like commercial or civil, industrial, residential, etc. But I do think there's a really interesting observation, which is that, like right now in the US, there's millions of, I would say, skilled workers doing kind of low leverage work, like, I don't know, remodeling luxury apartments. Nothing against, owners of luxury apartments, but it's not mission critical to our nation's goals per se. Painting fences, changing flapper valves, things that maybe homeowners could be doing themselves. And I think at the same time, we've got real infrastructure, energy, and kind of AI related construction projects that we're struggling to hire for. And so this insight that it's not just a shortage, but it's actually an access problem, it also has a slightly different adjacent kind of flavor to it, which is that it might also be a little bit of a misallocation of labor problem. And that's been caused by, I don't know, cultural drift, and maybe there's a lack of coordination. How does a singular nation move in unison with millions of workers all in?
Right.
But and so these are really, we've got obviously a huge amount of infrastructure. You mentioned the grading that our infrastructure has. That's what helps goods and services and everything else move. It helps our economy move forward, keeps us competitive. We're seeing an enormous uptick in data center construction, which could see America being at the forefront of AI energy infrastructure. We're obviously transitioning to various other energy forms. Obviously there's a lot of solar farm projects, even potentially nuclear. Really, and so I feel like this sounds. What do you do with this information? But we've seen this before, like World War II, we didn't invent any new workers, we reallocated them. Often, women without experience were put and trained into and deployed into manufacturing at scale. I think Rosie the Riveter represents a bit of a kind of, that legacy endures as well. Our data shows that pipe fitting, welding, and I think pipe laying, they share a very strong overlap in skills. Those trades are actually the most common trades for women, according to our data today. So I think that legacy still continues. And I think the question is, are you able to like reallocate that labor again? Would America be able to, at speed, align the skilled labor force to do the work that moves America forward? Which I don't know what that spark is, but I believe that's another interpretation of why we have a labor shortage, is because just culturally we've drifted out of making that a priority.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's also the digitization piece as well. So when you think about, lawyers, managers, salespeople, they have digital sort of profiles that exist that make it relatively efficient to connect them with employers. And so I want to talk a little bit about, that does not, or has not previously existed before Skillit, what the implications of that lack of digitization are for both employees and the employers that are trying to find them. Because if I'm right, that's the problem Skillit is helping to solve.
Yeah. So if you just think about how the world of, software evolved, it was, we needed the machines that were pretty heavy and bulky and sat on desks. And those were the first tools that we built. And so a lot of the people using that tool, dogfooding that tool to build the tools for other people who'd be using software, were all desktop based. And so therefore, the knowledge workers of the world, as you mentioned, your lawyers and accountants, sales folk, etc., it's really easy for them to have their skills digitized, because they're sat at a desk on a device that has plenty of surface area to essentially fill out profiles. And you can almost do that while you're working and no one notices, that you're working on your LinkedIn profile or whatever. And, LinkedIn's a great example, right? It's a good product, but it was a very powerful network, and the value of that network superseded the I would say the kind of quality of the product very quickly. And as a result, it became a community with a culture that the craft worker, the skilled worker, the deskless worker doesn't really feel at home, with. And so on the one hand, there's a little bit of a cultural disconnect there. And also, if you're out in the, I like to think of skilled workers, the hands are really truly a premium. You are either, using them, driving, holding something, it's cold out, you might have gloves on. So actually engaging with tools to fill out a form or a, application for something is not that trivial. And like, where's your resume stored? Do you have it on your phone? How easily could you pull your resume up on your phone if somebody asks you to? And the irony of that is you'd pull up your LinkedIn, which is typically populated by people providing the resume. Same with Indeed, same with Job, etc. So what that means is there has simply been a lack of any digital infrastructure that has focused on making it both easy for a craft worker to provide the information necessary in order for you to solve the discovery problem. Like, how do you find these people? By criteria you care about, right? Like, try going onto any platform and finding a commercial technician with HVAC experience, but they've worked in supermarkets and understand refrigeration racks. You're just not going to find it. The data has literally never been captured.
Yeah, right.
So on the one hand, you have to account for how their unique, the design experience you need to solve for them and on the road and in the field. And then you have to actually build a technology that captures the right information that means it's useful to an employer to discover. And that's the first step in solving this access problem.
Right. We'll go there in more depth in just a minute. But so the situation that EPCs, general contractors are facing is what? So how are they finding people? Phones, staffing, services? Like talk through the process that you see, employers using to find workers, and what the implications of that are for them and their job and the projects they're trying to complete.
Yeah. Well, so as I mentioned previously, they are, very often relying on all of the tools that are currently in the market that are actually designed for people searching for knowledge workers, desktop to desktop. So you're, there's a kind of, I see it in kind of two different buckets, right? You've got the digital, and then you've got the kind of manual. On the digital side, it's all your horizontal job boards. So your ZipRecruiter, your Indeed, etc. And then on the other side, on the manual side, it's walk-ins, it's staffing agencies, and maybe unions, I guess, on that side of the, in that bucket. The problem with the current like horizontal job boards, there's myriad problems with those, but fundamentally they don't capture the right data. So very often you're spending a lot of time trying to source on those platforms to no avail. You can't find the actual workers you're looking for. And the reason for that is very simple. They are horizontal job boards. They have, their whole product engineering and CS teams are allocated across the lowest common denominator features that need to solve for, say, 150 different industries. Construction is one industry, but it's a highly unique industry, very unique workflows, very unique kind of behavioral challenges to solve for. So they're never going to go deep and solve for that industry. And that means that you're using ill-fitting tools with, workflows that don't work for you, that are manual, the data's siloed, you're integrating with tools that aren't, it's a bit of a hodgepodge. And then on the manual side, it's just it's unpredictable. It's not scalable. You can't, you're not going to necessarily, when I say scalable, I mean, it's not predictable and it's not able to be forecasted. So, employer referrals, how do you engineer that so that for a fact you can support the labor you need on a project? The referrals you get might not be good enough. You might not get enough of them. So those are, and again, this all just stems from the problem that we've not digitized the worker, and we've never built the platform or digital infrastructure to enable recruiters, to solve for recruiters, craft recruiters and construction workers, the unique data and workflows that they have.
Right. Well, and that's what you have done and are working on. So I want to, go to sort of the origin story of Skillit. And I believe that, in some ways it was informed by what you were doing when you were still a general contractor in New York. Like you had the manual processes, but you were doing a little bit more maybe that perhaps anticipated what the work you've done with Skillit. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say that I forecasted everything we've built since, but we've learned an enormous amount in the market, and the problem is I think we're very passionate about the problem, because I really do think this is a big, hairy, kind of wicked problem that needs to be solved. But you're right. I in New York, general contractor. Basically hiring for skilled finished carpenters, rough carpenters, drywallers, and laborers. And the problem is that I was using the same tools I just described and wasn't getting quality data on a worker, often didn't get the ability to contact that worker easily. There's a labor shortage, right? Even back then, that was maybe, I want to say it was about 6 years ago that I stepped down there when I decided I was going to start Skillit, or 5 years ago now. There was a labor shortage, and so workers were already not answering their phone to a strange number. They don't have to. So I couldn't get the right information, couldn't connect with the worker. And what I found was when I did connect, because you can't really, when I was an apprentice or when I was even a journeyman, maybe 20 odd years ago, I would show up to a job site with my tools. I would be instructed to start building out maybe a sash window. I would get so far, somebody would come over and tell me it was good enough, and I would, stay on the job for a day, a week, a month, or however long I was needed. You can't do that anymore. And so you're trying to establish how good a worker is, both in terms of their education, their experience, their skills, how they think. And you're trying to do all that on a very quick phone call. So what I started doing was asking what I thought were these, insider questions. Like, I would ask carpenters, what are the true dimensions of a 2x4? I would get 3 different answers. They would be, that's a trick question. And I would be like, okay, nice chatting with you. I would get 2x4, right? And then I would get the kind of real dimensions, and then I would ask, well, how do you know that? And then it'd be like, well, obviously, the mill process, and you would get into talking about nailing patterns, and then you knew that somebody who knows that it's 1.5 by 3.5 has either installed it, they've bought it, and it just gave you a sense of that's a lead carpenter. And that was the beginning of like, oh, I could digitize that. I could build out a very simple digital assessment that would basically circumvent the phone call entirely. And by the way, that's why the company is called Skillit, right? Because I think the kind of fundamental assumption I had and still have is that, it's really about the skill. It's not the badging. It's not the diploma. It's do you or don't you have the skill? And of course, you can use knowledge in construction as a leading indicator of skill. No one's sitting around at night reading nailing patterns. But you might be sitting around reading Schrodinger's cat and have a little, you might be able to BS your way into talking to somebody who knows some physics or something, but you can't really do that in construction. So that was the kind of spark that, and just motivated by the size of the problem and its impact, that's when I stood down and founded Skillit.
So let's go through what Skillit entails. And so by that, I mean, there's a connection problem, and how does a platform begin to answer that connection problem? We'll get to AI as well, but it seems to me that as a start, you need buy-in and you need scale. You need people who are going to, be willing to digitize these skills that we're talking about. So let's go through that. Like what is necessary for a platform to be effective, and how have you sort of approached it?
So, I think the initial insight. So having been a skilled trade, and also having been on the GC side hiring for skilled trades, I think solving for the worker's pain is the first step that we took. And what we did there was we said, look, we'll help you build a single profile to rule them all, essentially. And that profile will give you the ability to, for the first time, properly express yourself in the language of craft. So your skills, your experience, your certifications, your expectations, what you want to be paid, the minimum paid except for the perfect job, where you want to be in a few years, pathways, per diem, etc. Really just craft. We didn't give any consideration to any other role in construction or any other industry. So very focused. And the promise there is that we will then take that and it becomes a digital avatar that you can be found and discovered by the best employers. We will go and find those employers and bring them to the platform and make it easy and intuitive for them to search from the exact criteria they're looking for, and they will find you. And that kind of solves the first piece of the puzzle. And I just don't think anyone had built that before for the worker. I think they've been kind of mostly kind of patronized, actually, if I'm being frank. Just, and also when you don't have a labor shortage and the supply-demand balance is in favor of the employer, you don't really have to do much. as soon as that changes, all of a sudden you have a very different problem on your hands, and you need you need to rethink. And then and then you mentioned the connection problem. So yeah, this is a really difficult problem to solve. We've really approached it by trying to build a tool or suite of tools that give both sides control over their time. So obviously recruiters have time in their day. I think previously we've not given much consideration to the workers' availability because we just assume they'll pick up a call. But the reality is they're driving, they're maybe with their family, they're on site, right? Like there's lots of reasons why they can't pick up. And I don't know, it feels like you're kind of ships in the night passing each other. Very difficult that you could actually land on a call, especially now that no one's answering the calls because they don't have to. Solving to that problem is core. You know, and we basically moved towards what we called like a voice KPI. So the purpose of the Skillit platform is to make it bring the best workers to the platform, digitize their profile, bring the best employers, make the search experience incredibly intuitive and easy. And when you find the worker you like, make it very simple to simply tap a button and get through to them. And of course, you know, we found that was the first real application of AI that we think is a great application for AI. But you know, has the worker input the right number? Does the telephone number, is it still in existence? You know, if they don't pick up, how do you reconnect? That's a lot of manual work on the recruiting side. It's a very difficult problem to solve. And amazingly, it took us a while to realize that the majority of the connections that were failing to happen early on in the platform were actually a result of recruiters not being able to get back to the worker. And a lot of that is down to the fact they themselves don't have the right tools in order to do craft recruiting, right? These are unique workflows and data sets that you need. So,
right. So if there are obviously going to be recruiters listening to us, and, you know, how would you describe what's different for them in the work that they do, the workflows they follow, how they do their work, if they're able to use Skillit? Like, what's different for them?
Right. So, first and foremost, they're mostly using in what we would call inbound solutions, maybe going to a job board, posting a job, and then workers apply, or people, you know, show up on site, or they're referred by others. And so it's typically, or it has been typically, I would say at a high level, it's kind of a passive motion. And as a result, you're actually getting a lot of noise coming at you, and you have to spend a lot of your time screening applicants. I mean, as to the aforementioned problem about a worker's ability to provide quality data so that recruiters can make a decision on you, they are the recipient of that, you know, that problem, right? They find it very hard to differentiate between a good and bad candidate. So on Indeed, for example, 95% of everyone who applies to a single role, that no matter how specific you have been in requesting, you know, we're looking for a sheet metal worker with the follow, you will get 95% of those applications are just not relevant. So a huge waste of time. Then you have to very quickly contact the worker, because you're trying to draw a connection between the fact that that worker was on Indeed and that you've called them, right? It's really a kind of race to the bottom, or a race against time, because the worker doesn't know who's calling them.
Right.
So again, these are just very inefficient platforms. And, you know, that's why really from, like, I would say day one, we tried to build the tools so that it reflected their workflows. They can collaborate with one another. The members of the recruiting team and hiring managers in the field can effortlessly kind of collaborate with one another. The ability to do a search today, I understand we're going to talk a little bit more about AI, so I won't go too deep into that. But you know, a really robust taxonomy that for the first time, even a fairly novice craft recruiter can go in and be intelligently led through exactly what trade experience, skills, etc. they're looking for, and find those workers. And seeing simple, really simple things like the pay guidance, is this worker likely to accept an offer, or what's their commute distance and commute time, which our platform offers. So like this worker has a 45-minute commute. That's a huge signal as to whether or not they'll be retained. Very simple things like being able to share the worker's resume and or profile with your colleagues, and have QR codes that just take you right to their profile, and you can tick off and say, yeah, I like them, please reach out to them, or however your workflows work between the office and the field. And so, it's just fundamentally built for how craft recruiters are doing their job, and is increasingly mobile, and and that creates a great worker experience as well. But I know we'll talk a little bit more about.
You teed it up. Let's talk about AI, because when I think about AI, I think about, at least the way it sounds like you're applying it is to really make, I'm not going to, you're going to say this better than me, but it feels like AI is doing some of the, we'll call it tedious work that a recruiter would spend a whole lot of time doing, in terms of trying to get a meeting set up, or, reminding people about, having that connection that matters. So it allows the recruiter to spend their time doing more valuable things. But with that as a preface, tell us how AI is deployed today.
So our first deployment of AI actually came from this really amazingly, amidst the labor crisis, the biggest breakdown wasn't actually getting workers to pick up, but getting recruiters to follow up. And so, even when a worker's available, or qualified or interested, they were really struggling to get call that worker back. Again, almost entirely happens on phone calls, right? So this is a highly call-centric workflow for both sides. And the reality is, recruiters are relying on really outdated processes, that don't scale, they don't play well with kind of call-based processes. And also just this, the reality is that there used to be plenty of workers being, and they have, things have changed, right? Things have moved on. They've got more opportunities than ever. And so if they don't hear back, they just move on. And so this led to about 75% of workers that have expressed interest in a role not getting a call back. And so there's just a fantastic application for AI here, which is we decided to build really the world's first AI scheduling assistant just for craft recruitment. And its narrow focus to begin with was, a recruiter would go in on Skillit, select the worker, call the worker to initiate, the process. And Sam is our AI's name. Sam would dial the worker, provide a very brief introduction, like, hi, this is Sam from Skillit. Such and such is interested in, interviewing you for a, heavy equipment operator role in Dallas, Texas, for example. And if they're interested, they're connected directly. It's kind of like a warm intro, right? So, but if for any reason, and also we've got kind of a little bit of a branded caller ID feature, so the worker is more likely to pick up. But if they don't, Sam follows up by text and will say, hi, I just tried calling you. It will answer basic questions. It will handle all of the rescheduling if necessary. It will handle reminders. And so there's no chasing. There's no back forth. Sam handles everything, does it around the clock, 24/7, even on weekends. And then when it's time, Sam connects everyone. And then, and puts everybody through. And so all of this happens for the recruiter on a custom dashboard that helps them track and manage and stay organized with this call-centric workflow. So that Sam can handle 10, 20, hundreds of interactions at once. And at the same time as that, what's fantastic is the worker feels valued because they get a response to every single message. So if they ask, well, tell me a little more about the opportunity, or tell me a little more about, Sam's currently got a very narrow mandate. We've prompt engineered Sam in such a way that it doesn't hallucinate and stays on track, and its primary goal is to get that call to happen. But it gives them a great hiring experience. So as a result, a recruiter will reach out once, just tap a button once, and Sam does everything else to get you to that call. So that's generating maybe 4 times more interviews. It's eliminating 90% of the scheduling work, which is like 30% of the recruiter's day. To choose a time that works for them, every message gets a response, and they get a world-class hiring experience. So that's been like the first application of SAM. AI, which our tool is called SAM. I'll use SAM and AI interchangeably, but I really mean AI.
Yeah.
And so that's where we started. And then what we began to kind of systematically expand the scope of AI in the Skillit platform, where, because what we really think is the problem here is, again, to my previous point about, like, it's not just a supply problem, it's an access problem. Construction, it doesn't just need more labor as an industry. It needs to be able to access the workers it already has, and it needs for that a purpose-built kind of hiring infrastructure, and that needs to happen really quickly, with precision and with speed, and at scale, and that is the perfect application for AI. So in terms of, I've given you the first use case. The second one is we're moving more towards enabling what we call conversational AI, where the worker can create a profile simply by conversing with Sam. So, as a former tradesman, I know, like, hands are always in use. I mentioned before, they're at premium. Conversational AI lets the worker build a searchable profile with basically their voice. I mean, they can just be chatting into their phone. And so they're no longer filling out forms, or they're kind of like chatting or messaging and building out and maintaining these data-rich profiles which best represent them. And that means you get much better quality data on the worker, and it's easy for them to maintain it and keep it up to date, right? So the worker can just be like, oh, hey, Sam, can you update my OSHA 30? I just got certified. Boom, it's on their profile.
Right.
So that's on the worker side, the application of AI that we're using additional to SAM, and the kind of automated scheduling assistant. The other one is meaning-based search. So the fancy term for that is semantic search, but I don't think many people, I didn't even know what that meant when I first heard it, but meaning-based search can make every single worker discoverable. So semantic search, what it means is you can understand the intent behind a search query, not just the keywords. So if you're like a novice recruiter, or you're hired, like, regardless of your experience level, or maybe you're really experienced, but it's a new role, and you don't quite know the exact skills that worker needs, or our AI can actually find the qualified candidate just by the description of the skill, or even the project, or maybe the past employer. Like, oh, we're looking for somebody that's done TIG welding, but it's more on the civil side, and it will interpret your meaning. It's essentially like ChatGPT for craft recruiting. And so therefore, you're solving both the problem of getting the worker digitized and that information being maintained and current and accurate, and then you're solving the search problem. And of course, we're already attacking the connection problem. And I think what that does is, ultimately what that creates is a highly, a massive database, essentially, of digitized and vetted craft labor, a search engine that's built just for craft to specifically and quickly find the right talent, and then this one-click phone interview system. And I think that solves the access problem, which, for all intents and purposes, takes most of the pressure off of this labor shortage.
Right. Well, I think people will see that there are some names on the screen of companies. And can we take a few minutes and talk about what this looks like in the real world? So are there an example or two that you can provide that just illustrates, if someone decides to use Skillit, this is this is what it solves for, and these are the results?
Yeah, in no particular order. If you just take a WB Moore's electrical contractor in the southeast, Charlotte in particular, for them to come onto the platform and instantly discover the workers that they're looking for, and some of their roles are very niche, and be able to find them, and for the worker to have just signed up and get connected with immediately. So both parties having this aha moment where it only took one click from either side, but yet they're magically connected. They're able to solve their hiring problems, which enables their projects to flow. We've had, Westbrook is a good example. They have, in using SAM, they have been able to spend something like 5% of the time they are spending sourcing on Indeed. And that time goes into spending, that time saved is going into spending time with, high quality candidates, getting to know them better, working on improving their recruiting processes, their company material. They're spending more time doing higher impact stuff. Who else? I would say Shelby is a really interesting company, highly specialized talent, lots of rod busters. They specialize in reinforcing like steel post tension cables for a lot of concrete structures like bridges and stuff. They were also struggling across your traditional platforms and came in, hired 6 full-time iron workers and rod busters straight away. And had I think about a 64% connection rate. So again, and then managed to successfully expand across a bunch of different markets. A company like Brassfield and Gorey. Brassfield and Gorey is a top 50, I would say, top 50 E&R contractor, and their use of Skillit, I think, was really fantastic. They were actually tasked with it's a huge power plant project, Newnham, Georgia, and needed to hire, I think, something like 100 full-time pipe fitters, welders, laborers in 1 month. Herculean task, typically not accomplished via the traditional solutions. And one of the big problems there is they've got recruiters in the office and people in the field that they would like to bring into the hiring process, but because there's no custom tool for that, it's extremely difficult to pull off and manage and highly laborious. They hit their hiring goal. They also got kind of like 6x better top to bottom hiring rates. So it was a much more efficient process, but they also got 8 times the number of people in the field actually participating in the process. So that's a much more a much more efficient hiring process that they were able to build around Skillit. We were able to help them re-engineer their process going forward. So yeah, lots of different instances of being able to find the exact workers you're looking for, connect with them effortlessly, spend more time doing strategic stuff, and of course, most importantly, hire the right people and keep projects moving. Unlock revenue, move into new markets, etc. So.
Right. Okay. Well, we could obviously keep talking for a long time, but we're gonna stop it there. Except that I do want to get to one audience question, and it's very practical. So the question is this: as an employer, how can I get started using Skillit?
Great question. If you'd like to learn more about Skillit, just visit skillit.com and book a quick demo to see how we can help you scale your craft. Well,
I think that's going to do it for us today. This is a great discussion, really interesting, very relevant for the needs of the skilled trade industry and all of these projects that we desperately need to get built here in the United States. And here's a way to get the labor that's needed to do all this important work. So Fraser, thanks so much for taking the time to talk through all of this today. And obviously, I want to thank our audience for joining us. I hope you found the discussion as insightful and interesting as I did. Hope to see you again next webinar we do, and hope you have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Chris. Bye.
Bye.